In this video, I'll be going over some of the characteristics of autism spectrum disorder. As we know, there are a couple main categories that these characteristics fall under, which are cognitive and neurological, behavioral and sensory, communication and language, and then social. So I'll be going over a couple of the characteristics in each of those categories. Obviously, this is not a comprehensive list, and I think it's important to remember that ASD looks different in different individuals. So to start with some of the cognitive and neurological characteristics, first is that there's an atypical neurological development. So that means that the neurological development is not typical of what we normally see. Some of those things can look like lower verbal, nonverbal, and adaptive skills. It can also look like individuals having a hard time taking perspective of others, as well as recognizing how their actions affect other people as well. Again, this is not a comprehensive list of all of the cognitive and neurological characteristics that we can see. Again, this is just a short example bullet points of a few. As far as behavioral and sensory, we see a lot of restrictive behaviors and repetitive behaviors. We see a lot of students or individuals, for that matter, struggling with routine changes. As far as sensory, we see those atypical responses to sensory input. So for an individual with autism, that might be unable to have someone touch them, whereas you or I might be okay if someone walks by us and puts their hand on our shoulder. It wouldn't bother us. That could also look like certain textures in clothing or certain food textures having an adverse effect on an individual with ASD. That could also look like flapping of the hands or vestibular input, so jumping might bother their balance and their vestibular input. Again, just like the cognitive and neurological list, this is not a comprehensive list of all of the characteristics, but just a few bullet points. Moving on to communication and language, a lot of times individuals with autism struggle with communication and language. That can be struggling with interpreting nonverbal communication, so some of those gestures or facial expressions that you and I are able to understand. Students with ASD or individuals with ASD struggle to pick up on those cues. It might be struggling to interact with peers. You and I are able to sit down and have a conversation with our peers, find a topic that both of us can talk about and interact appropriately, whereas individuals with ASD really struggle to interact with their peers. They also can struggle with things like inferencing, so things that are not quote unquote black and white or explicitly written out or explicitly explained. They have a hard time with that, picking up on those context clues. It also can be something as simple, which we often forget about, is that some individuals with ASD are completely nonverbal, so don't have that language and are unable to communicate verbally like we are, and might have to use some of those AACs in order to communicate in a different way. And lastly are some social characteristics. Oh, before that, again, this communication and language list is not comprehensive. These are just a couple bullet points to go through. And the social piece, they can be struggling to initiate social interactions. It could be struggling to respond to social interactions, and also struggling to show interest in your peers. Whereas we're able to strike up a conversation and ask our peers or people older or younger than us how they are, what they did over the weekend, able to begin those social interactions and continue those social interactions and appropriately end those social interactions. Individuals with ASD struggle to initiate those interactions and to respond appropriately, and oftentimes are not showing interest in their peers. Again, this video is not a comprehensive list of cognitive and neurological, behavioral and sensory, communication and language, or social characteristics, just a couple bullet points to go over. Thank you.